Romans 13. It's not secular government, or the New Testament is inconsistent. Reason 7 of 10 why Romans 13 is biblical government. Hello everybody, I'm Jim McCotter, welcome. If Romans 13 is depicting a secular government, the Apostle Paul would be contradicting himself in 1 Corinthians 6, 2 Corinthians 10, 1 Timothy 1, and the Apostle Peter in 1 Peter 2. In 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 1, Paul says, quote, "When one of you has a dispute with another believer, how dare you file a lawsuit and ask a secular court to decide the matter instead of taking it to other believers?" End quote. If Romans 13 was promoting submission to secular government, Paul would have never written, quote, "How dare you file a lawsuit and ask a secular court to decide the matter?" 2 Corinthians 10, 5 and 6, quote, "We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture their rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ. And after you have become fully obedient, we will punish everyone who remains disobedient." End quote. If Romans 13 was promoting submission to secular government, Paul maybe should have not written, quote, "We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God, and we teach them to obey Christ and punish everyone who remains disobedient." 1 Timothy 1, verse 8 and 9, quote, "We know that God's law is good when used correctly. For the law was not intended for people who do what is right. It is for people who are lawless and rebellious, who are ungodly and sinful." End quote. If Romans 13 was promoting submission to secular government, Paul would have never written, quote, "God's law was not intended for people who do what is right. It is for people who are lawless and rebellious, who are ungodly and sinful." 1 Peter 2, verse 14, quote, "Governors are sent for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right." End quote. If Romans 13 was promoting submission to secular government, the Apostle Peter would have been contradicting the Apostle Paul in writing, "Governors are sent for the punishment of evildoers and the praise of those who do right." End quote. But this happens to be exactly what the Apostle Paul also said in Romans 13. Imposing biblical government. It's not uncommon to hear even Christians assert that righteous men cannot impose God's biblical law on non-believers. Well, I ask, why not? To do so does not force conversion on anyone, which is impossible to begin with. Conversion takes place in the heart of man and cannot be legislated. However, if it's unbiblical for Christians to enforce God's moral law on unbelievers, why did the Apostle Paul write 1 Timothy 1, 8 and 9, quote, "For the law was not intended for people who do what is right. It's for people who are lawless and rebellious, who are ungodly and sinful." End quote. Did all the 17th century Christian colonials do wrong? They established God's biblical civil governments with Christians ruling under Jesus as king and God's law over all the people in their colonies. The Frenchman Alexis de Tocqueville wrote in 1835 in Democracy in America, quote, "They, the 17th century Christian colonials, named their magistrates, concluded peace, or declared war, made police regulations, and enacted laws as if their allegiance was due only to God. Nothing can be more curious and at the same time more instructive than the legislation of that period. It is there that the solution of the great social problem which the United States now presents to the world is to be found. Amongst these documents we shall notice, especially characteristic, the code of laws promulgated by the little state of Connecticut in 1650. The legislators of New Connecticut, Haven, New Connecticut, they begin with the biblical penal laws, and they borrow their provisions from the text of Holy Writ, copied verbatim from the books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy." End quote. What about John Clark Ridpath, who wrote in 1874 History of the United States, and I quote, "In June of 1639, the leading men of New Haven, Connecticut, held a convention and formally adopted the Bible as the constitution of the state. Everything was strictly conformed to the religious standard. The government was called the House of Wisdom. None but church members were admitted to the rights of citizenship. End quote. Then there's William Holmes McGuffey, who wrote the McGuffey Readers that taught virtually every elementary school child in America from the 1830s to the 1920s. In McGuffey's 6th electric reader in 1879, he described America's early government. Quote, "Their form of government was as strictly theocratical insomuch as that it would be difficult to say where there was any civil authority among them distinct from ecclesiastical jurisdiction. Whenever a few of them settled a town, they immediately gathered themselves into a church, and their elders were magistrates, and their code of laws was the Pentateuch, God's law. God was their king, and they regarded him as truly and literally so." End quote. Many contemporary Christians scorn the very suggestion that Christians should hold dominion over society by means of God's moral law. But the vacuum created by the Christian dereliction of duty has been filled up by a multitude of non-Christians. Proverbs 25:26 says, "Like a trampled spring and a polluted well is a righteous man who gives way before the wicked." End quote. Can any society be better off under the rule of non-Christians who pervert truth? Isaiah 5:20 says, "Who call evil good and good evil, that puts darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." End quote. Fallacious Christians promote being subject to such godless government by perverting Romans 13 for godless secular government. Such Christians are therefore easy prey for the wicked to rule over them. But God says just the opposite. Proverbs 28:4, quote, "To reject God's law is to praise the wicked. To obey God's law is to fight them." End quote. So it's no wonder if contemporary Christianity has become more and more trampled underfoot by men. As Jesus said in Matthew 5:13, quote, "You are the salt of the earth," which certainly includes governments of the earth. "But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men." End quote. Galatians 6:7 says, "Don't be misled. You will always harvest whatever you plant." Finally, 1 Kings 18:21, quote, "Elijah went before the people and said, 'How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him.' But the people said nothing."